Hello everybody, my name is Edoardo Croci, professor at Bocconi University and a researcher at the research center called GREEN, devoted to territory, environment, energy and mobility. In these days, Milan is hosting T20 under the G20, the meeting related to research, academia and think tanks. So these are very active days and we are glad to host a T20 related event here at Bocconi. I also want to remind that that last week Milan hosted the pre-COP. You know that COP26 on climate will be in Glasgow, but Italy is co-organizer with the UK, and in Milan we hosted the Youth COP and the pre-COP. These were very interesting days with relevant international speakers, and we are glad today to host this event on infrastructure and development, new perspective, new solutions to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Actually, beyond the distinguished speakers which we have today, and in particular it will be Nicolas Bouchot next to me to introduce the speakers. Actually, Nicolas is co-hosting with me this event in his role as president of Paris Circle Grand Paris, as president of Circle Grand Paris and as fellow of the Global Solution Initiative. I will tell you why a Global Solution Initiative is relevant in a few seconds. The reason is that today we also present, in connection to this event, Intersecting. Intersecting, of course, is a physical book, as you can see, quite heavy indeed, with a lot of pages and with wonderful pictures selected by Nicolas. But Intersecting is also the result of a huge international efforts by several researchers, policymakers, and business people, which debated and discussed about the topic of sustainable recovery after the pandemics and the role of infrastructures, and also with a focus on cities and the role of cities in sustainable development. This effort developed over a few years through meetings in different locations, in different continents, and also virtually because of COVID. So really a big effort, and we are very glad to have the opportunity to present the result here in Milan connected to T20. Sustainable, actually one of the partners of Intersecting is Global Solution Initiative, which sponsored the initiative with other relevant players that, of course, we thank for the occasion. Also, let me say that Bocconi is devoted to the topics of sustainability, in particular linked to climate, and in particular also, in my case, linked to urban development, with several researches, most of them at the international level, and in a few weeks we will also officially launch a new initiative by Bocconi University, which is the SUR Lab, the Sustainable Urban Regeneration Lab. It's a new research lab which will bring researchers, in cooperation with relevant companies involved in sustainable development at the urban scale, and in connection with other research centers abroad and international organizations. Our goal is to further development the topic of sustainable urbanization, linked also to infrastructures and to the impact on the environment with an economic and policy approach, trying to assess the private and social value generated by sustainable urban regeneration. Of course, this is a multidimensional topic, as I think we will speak today regarding infrastructure and development. It's multidimensional in terms of actors, it is multidimensional in terms of impacts. Think about air, water, soil, landscape, and other dimensions and matrix, and it's multidimensional also in terms of indicators to assess these impacts. As Bocconi, we think we can provide a relevant contribution at this purpose with such a perspective, and so this is, let's say, a strategic topic in our view. Our initiative at Bocconi is also linked to the launch of a new course, a Master of Science course on economics of sustainable urban regeneration, which I will start to teach with colleagues next year at the beginning of February, and with the launch in 2022 of a MOOC, a massive online course on this topic with a global scope. Indeed, global cities like Milan is the only Italian global city actually, are playing a very relevant role in the development of our planet. Think that investments in infrastructures in the next decade, in the next 20 years, will be mainly concentrated in cities. International data tell us that about 70% of resources will be devoted to investment in infrastructures at the urban scale. These investments will be, in most cases, new investments in developing countries and investments to renovate existing infrastructure in developed countries. So the way and the policy choices in order to address these investments will be very relevant to define the future of our planet, something that we have to care about, and the recent pre-COP showed how the interest of future generations should be taken into account, and how these kind of relevant investments are determinant. Let me conclude this brief introduction only to mention that on this topic I, Nicolas, and most of the speakers are also very active in terms of providing written contributions, papers, and books. Actually, in the context of T20, we also wrote policy brief on this topic, which is a relevant contribution at this purpose. And of course, G20 can also provide an overall framework approach and address to these topics at the global level, which is very relevant. Actually, Agenda 2030, the Paris Agreement, several international initiatives, even at the scale of G20, are shaping a framework where countries and even subnational actors like cities can act, and research has a relevant role in assessing the opportunities which can derive from this new framework, which is also a framework of coming out of the pandemics, where the recovery packages which Europe and most countries around the world defined are actually green recovery packages, and they represent an opportunity to reshape our economies with a just transition, but also determining new areas for investments, new approaches, new indicators, and shaping a more sustainable future. That's it on my side. I will pass the word to Nicolas, which will manage this day. And thank you again for being here with us in person or virtually.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening for the friends and colleagues who are online. Thank you very much for hosting this hybrid session and panel about infrastructure and development, new perspectives and solutions, which is also the occasion of the, I would say, first launch of Intersecting. I cannot thank you enough, Eduardo, because this is the first time that we actually physically meet, right, after 18 months, all embedded in the pandemic. And I must also thank all your team, because organizing physical events, even now, still remains challenging, right? For distancing and all sorts of sanitary issues. But we can see also that, I would say, the world is knocking to our door. And that while we have been in lockdown and while we could not travel and move, etc., the world has not stopped moving, and sometimes not in the right direction. If you just remember that pre-global crisis in 2008, there was a subprime crisis in the United States. And this subprime crisis linked with housing mortgage. You could see it if you looked at how bad the urban landscape was turning. And now if you look in China, and again, a little bit more than a decade afterwards, it's all again an issue of global real estate turning wrong, and that might also affect not only China, but part of the Asian economy or in the global economy. Definitely, our understanding that urbanization has something to do with global power balance is not overrated. And one of our key findings is also about overcoming just classical approaches to urbanization through like just cities or urban networks. We must have a much deeper system approach, connecting macroeconomics, connecting the environment, connecting to some extent geopolitics, but connecting also and understanding how things are being played on the ground. And I think this is very important. So I will not be long because we have two keynote addresses from Sachin Chaturvedi, who is the Director General of an important think tank in India, in New Delhi, Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, and the Dean and CEO of the Asian Development Bank Institute from Tokyo. They all have participated to Intersecting, ADBI as a knowledge partner, and Sachin and RIS also as a very important partner. Let me just briefly thank the co-editors of Intersecting, Milindo Chakrabarti and OP Jindal University in Sonipat, near New Delhi. Gunnar Hartmann, the designer of Intersecting in Berlin. Holger Kuhle, who is the policy advisor for strategic knowledge partnerships as GIZ, the German cooperation agency, and who was allowed to kickstart the Intersecting process. Nella Andrietti, who is the senior capacity building director at ADBI in Tokyo, and Riyatu Mariatu Kibitia, who is the director of the Center for Social and Economic Research at the University of Jakarta, and who has been also very much involved together with a colleague Teoko Rifki in all steps of Intersecting. The other organizations and persons that need to be thanked, and this will also highlight how we have designed not only the book but the approach that you have referred to, Eduardo, is Dennis Nower, the president of the Global Solutions Initiative, and Markus Engels, the Secretary General, and all the team, because they believed in the value of a project, which I must say at the beginning was a little bit maybe fuzzy and certainly not in the usual boundaries of research or disciplinary approach, or even, I would say, classical ways to think about global policy making. But GSI has been there from the very beginning, and and hopefully for the next steps. Because also together with ADBI, with OECD, Aziza Akmush, and with Suez, with Henri de Grossouvre, my friend and colleague here, and with whom we co-founded this Cercle Grand Paris about a decade ago, we made it possible to move from just an idea to digital conversations, to something consolidated, to a physical book, and to a series which is available online of 6 ebooks, volumes, and to a process that today is only the starting point, right? We are embedded into these intersections at least up until 2023, probably 2024, and that's something to take into account very seriously. The lead co-chair of the T20 task force on infrastructure, Francesco Profumo, who is the chairman of the Compagnia di San Paolo and chairman of Fondazione Bruno Kessler in Trento, has also been very supportive together with his team, Valeria Loria, who is in Beijing and should be online now. She managed to go to Beijing, and Nicola Bilota from EAE. I happen to co-chair the task force on infrastructure investment for a few years now. Raja Al-Marzouki was the lead co-chair in the T20 Saudi Arabia last year, and he will be there with us in a minute. Intersecting is a collective work that with people that who all believe that changes have also to be looked at the edges, right? At the edges of what happens. And it's not about transdisciplinary approach or interdisciplinary, it's really intersections between completely different spheres of knowledge, of action, of policy making, of being public or private, or in the academia, or both, or in community service. And herewith we have about 100 co-authors who have contributed really from across the G20 spheres and even beyond. I'm thinking here about a number of very important contributors from Central Asia who typically are used to interact all together, but more rarely to be a part of really global initiatives. And last but not least, on the cover of Intersecting, there is this person, Francesca Palumbo, who is a nurse in San Salvatore Hospital in Pesaro in Italy. And when we found this photography, we were struck by the intensity, right, of the glades. She was among these people, the frontliners, during the very peak of the pandemic in the spring and first half of 2020, where Italy, Europe, and so many other countries were hit so badly. And we thought we needed to pay a small tribute to her. So yesterday, actually, there was a first pre-launch together with Francesca yesterday in Pesaro, in her city. I don't know if we can show the, yes, this photography with the deputy mayor of Pesaro and with the photographer Alberto Giuliani, who also have, in that sense, contributed to the. And you see Francesca in real life now doesn't look exactly as as on this photography, and somehow this is also a reflection about life that has not stopped and that is restarting, but also a reminder that the pandemic first is not over and risks are still very much on our doorsteps, not only health risks, but all other kinds of risks. And to address these kind of issues, we thought one way, there are many ways, but one way is infrastructure investment. Economic infrastructure, like roads, energy, etc., which is a massive issue on its own, right? Social infrastructure, and somehow other aspects of infrastructure systems, including knowledge and cognitive infrastructure. But to address those aspects of new perspectives on infrastructure, I'm insisting here, it was said at multiple occasions in the summit of the T20, how much the links of interdependency between us here in Milano or in Europe and emerging countries, resource-rich countries and not resource-rich countries are very important, intense, how debt issues will be structuring global politics along with other aspects of sovereignty such as environment, be it carbon, be it biodiversity, And infrastructure somehow, including nature-based solutions, you always find this rationale. And it's also something that does shape the very landscape that we are living with and that we are embedded in, right? So to discuss and have a kind of just additional highlights about ongoing ways to rethink infrastructure systems along with development approaches, which means also probably addressing macroeconomic issues in a theoretical manner, right, about organization of market and so on. I will now pass it on to, I hope technology will work and will be with us, to Sachin Chaturvedi. Sachin, are you here?
Hello.
Yes, Sachin, we can hear you. Loud and clear.
Okay. Very good.
I know you have a very packed schedule in this afternoon in Delhi, but thank you very much. We have indeed organized and prepared this session very much with RIS, with Dr. Dash, and with Sachin. So please let us know your thoughts about these issues of infrastructure and development in the context of shaping sustainable responses to the COVID-19 crisis. The floor is yours, Sachin.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks a lot. Let me at the outset congratulate you for intersecting, and also to Professor Eduardo Croce for setting the context, the dimensions within which we are talking of the green economy. And at the Bocconi University, the Green Economy Observatory is, I think, extremely important. My fellow keynote addressee, Dean Sonobu from the Asian Development Institute, Tokyo, would also provide us the details that are necessary in terms of how we see this convergence of Agenda 2030 and the post-pandemic response for a very resilient and sustainable approach to infrastructure, and that I think would be extremely important. The panel with Reato Kubita, the director of the LPEM Jakarta, and Raja Bocconi, we had interacted with you earlier. I hope you have joined in. And also the director of think tank Suez Paris, Henry Goswell, and of course the president of the Global Solution Initiative, Dennis. So I think, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, intersecting is a very, very important contribution. As Nicholas very rightly said, it is trying to capture changes at the edges. And that, I think, is an important narrative in terms of how we bring in various institutional approaches that are required for us to see infrastructure as it is unfolding. The fact that it is happening as a side event on lines of the T20 Italy, the conference, it is important for us to see the linkages that are there between infrastructure and development. What kind of new solutions and what kind of new perspectives we have on the table, particularly as the cover page itself reflects the commitment of the frontline workers after the COVID crisis, the way we are going to fund it, the way we are going to see the new age infrastructure from a very different perspective, bringing in the digital technologies. But four words I think are extremely important, Nicholas, here. The quality, the resilience, the sustainability, and of course, inclusion. And the various modalities that we are looking at it is more in form of fintech, it is more in form of startups, the healthy situation that we are expecting after post-COVID, but also in terms of the way we manage agriculture, the urban crisis, the governance part of it, and of course the necessary skills. And this requires solutions which are important both in terms of ensuring quality and also in terms of resilient infrastructure. Professor Eduardo was absolutely right that we need to bring in sustainable development goals when we are eyeing for principles for quality infrastructure and investment. And that, I think, brings in both in terms of quality as to how we are going to address the poverty alleviation issues, governance issues, but also financial inclusion. And that, I think, is important for all the societies which are trying to bring in the necessary resilience. Resilience not only to manage stress that is there with vis-a-vis natural disaster, but also vis-a-vis energy consumption. And in that endeavor, governments can play an absolutely important role. India's idea of having the International Solar Alliance or Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, I think they give in the necessary bandwidth, but also the contributions which are there as part of intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs. I think they are very, very important when we think of non-fossil fuel sources to go 40% by 2030 as India has committed. And it is from this perspective that today I pick up our broad focus on three dimensions of our address. One is about the infrastructure digital connect, the role that fintech can play, and of course the solar energy. And at RIS, my colleague Dash and our team is looking at the solutions which are coming out from the Supra Tag, the Insure Tag, the RAG Tag, and crypto assets, the robo advisors who have come up. They are trying to see various initiatives, be that in form of e-wallet or e-money or the crowdfunding that is needed to find out those solutions which are of key significance. And here I think it is also important for us to see that the global fintech size, which is almost 87 billions in 2020, is trying to see how we can bring in more actors in this with a couple of other developing countries, particularly like you see it in China or Kenya. More and more efforts have come in to see how the infrastructure can actually bring in the greater inclusion through technology and through financial technology that is required to be strengthening the processes of infrastructure building, and also trying to see that the various initiatives that are important for us. In India, we have also established what is called as the National Payment Corporation of India, and this is trying to reduce the transaction costs. Throughout all the G20s, heads of states have tried to manage this through a greater infrastructure support, trying to reduce the transaction cost for remittances, and also trying to see how we supplement the wider global efforts through the official development assistance to see how other flows are becoming important. And from that, the idea of transforming e-governance and trying to create a center of excellence for Internet of Things, and trying to see how DigiLocker and a couple of other initiatives are of great significance. Developing countries are also trying to work this out, and I'm glad that T20 has this time played an attention, and I'm sure intersecting would provide greater solutions in terms of how Compact with Africa would actually bring in the wider relevance for African countries. The forthcoming Indonesian G20 presidency would also provide the bandwidth which is needed for us to connect the dimensions of engagement, trying to bring in the multilateral development and the associated instances in Africa to connect. And that, I think, is required in terms of both the public-private partnership, but also in terms of how we look at the modes of engagement that are going to provide the dimensions of engagement. So, Nicholas, overall, I feel some of these issues would help us set go forward in terms of partnership, and also in terms of making the Grand Paris Alliance more relevant for developing countries and for future presidencies, as Global Solutions Initiative also gives us the necessary gravitas to our efforts for infrastructure, which is connecting the wider development issues and the digital connect of the process. So with these words, I stop here, Nicholas. Thank you.
Tachin, thank you very much for your kind words, but also important words, and for also delineating a space for future cooperation. I think that in the near future, development, South-to-South cooperation, overall flows of infrastructure investments, which you have also described as connecting fintech and inclusion, and maybe finding connecting points between the work in the T20, the work with the S20 and Academy of Sciences in terms of understanding the complexity of systems, right? We need to upgrade our abilities to understand where we are and to do that collectively, especially together with you. I will now pass it on, if you allow me, with no further notice, to Dean Tetsushi Sonobe in Tokyo. Dean Sonobe, are you here?
Nicola, can you hear me? Thank you, Nicola, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Edward Croce and the Green Center, Bocconi University, for hosting this meeting for the launch of this book. Connection is difficult. Okay, so let me repeat. Thank you, Professor Edward Croce and the Green Center, Bocconi University, for hosting this meeting for the launch of this book, Intersecting, and providing an opportunity to raise the issue of infrastructure and development, a major topic for the next year's G20 in Indonesia, India, and Brazil. Thanks also to Professor Sachin Chaturvedi for the excellent keynote remarks. I found many points on which I fully agree with you, and I also learned a lot of new things. Thanks again to Nicola for your initiative and leadership in advancing Intersecting as a book and as an approach. In the same vein, I thank Dr. Denis Sunoa and Liatu Mariatul and the co-editors of Intersecting. Recently, about a year ago, I joined a group of people advocating the Intersecting approach, which is an approach to agenda setting and the solution finding through providing a multi or transdisciplinary, multi-layer and multi-dimensional forum or platform for everyone in the world. Today, I'd like to talk about the reason why I came to prefer this approach after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Short answer is that I recognize the value of this approach for society increased, and also that the use of this approach became easier, much easier than before. I think the value of this approach increased because inequality has assumed great importance in policy discussions, including the discussion about infrastructure policy. In many countries, developed or developing across the world, social divide has widened and deepened during the pandemic between rich and poor, more educated and less educated, and urban and rural, and along other lines. In addition to these inequality problems within countries, gaps between rich and poor countries have increased, and there has been a setback in poverty reduction, sanitation, and food security in developing countries. Moreover, we are seeing the global vaccination inequality. Generally speaking, inequality is a problem of distribution, in which an increase in one's share means a decrease in the share of someone else, and hence it is inherently a political and a geopolitical problem, which is always associated with propaganda, fake news, populism, and so on. Also, inequality problems are often technical, economic, social, and cultural. Each argument for and against a policy proposal must be checked and double-checked by experts in different expertise, in different disciplines, and with different viewpoints. This is why I think the value of intersecting is increasing today. Similarly, climate change and other issues related to sustainability are multidisciplinary and subject to fake news and populism. This is also the issue to which intersecting can work well. Previously, intersecting was not easy because convening a number of people from different parts of the world was expensive, time-consuming, and environmentally problematic. Talking to people in different expertise or different disciplines was and still is difficult. So previously, many think tankers, including myself, approached policymakers individually to convince them to take actions, when we ourselves wonder whether our policy proposal has been sufficiently checked and cross-checked, whether it is based on knowledge and facts, if not abundant firm evidence, and whether it really works. But now, convening a number of experts is not at all difficult. Of course, discussions with people in different disciplines is still a challenge. But as we increase opportunities of such discussions, the difficulty will decrease. So we are now shifting toward intersecting, through which we check and polish our policy proposals before proposing to policymakers. Having explained why I became an advocate of intersecting, let me conclude with some words about what I want to argue through intersecting. As you all know, infrastructure investments play critically important roles in social inclusion, resilience, and sustainability. I want to emphasize that infrastructure investments can play its important roles only when they are accompanied by appropriate investments in human capital. This is because infrastructure investments are successful only when the investments have high social returns, and because the returns to investment depends on the amount of benefits and the amounts of cost. The benefit depend on the ability of people who use the infrastructure, while the costs depend on the ability of those who build, operate, and maintain the infrastructure. So human capital is as important as infrastructure itself. So I'd like to emphasize that the intersecting approach should be applied to the question of infrastructure and development, which consists of sub-questions of how to design, finance, implement good infrastructure projects, and how to develop human capacity to improve the ability of users, builders, and so on. So I look forward to more and more intersecting in the future. Thank you very much.
For very deep and strong insights, but also for believing and supporting into this approach, and more than that, helping to step by step refine it, enriching it, and connect this intuition to more centerpiece agendas, be it development, be it the role of think tanks, be it infrastructure investments. Thank you again, thank you very much. And to answer your call, yes, there will be a follow-up, right, of intersecting. One has started already with a cycle of dialogues this year and next year about resources and circular economy, with another cycle of dialogues which has also started and is led especially by ADBI with the Secretariat of ASEAN about the future of work and creative economy under the label Creative Economy 2030. And that's a very important topic that also connects with human capital ahead of the G20 of Indonesia. And a third sphere, which is less advanced in terms of moving on in an original and fruitful manner, but very important about intersecting and multilateralism and the delivery of the 2030 agenda. Actually, one of the first illustration of the book is how much have we advanced or not because of the COVID-19 crisis, and how much it has impacted the delivery of the SDGs is actually a question we cannot escape. Thank you again very much, Dean Sonobe, and I suggest that with no further notice, we move into the next steps of this morning exchanges. That is a short panel discussion together with Henri de Grossouvre, which I invite to join me here on the podium. So we will try to respect the sanitary requirements, but we need to be a little bit far from each other. Henri, maybe you can sit here. Yes, please. Or if you could put the name tags or sit next to me. And Raja Al-Marzouki. Raja, please join me for a couple of remarks. And we should have Riatu online. I'm just checking if Riatu is... Riatu, are you here online?
Yes, Nicola. Hi.
Bonjour, Riatu. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining in. So you have heard all the conversation, and starting with Eduardo Croce's words and perspective on research and on why we in here hosted this meeting and this book launch today, and the very insightful keynotes from Director Chaturvedi and Dean Sonobe. Before we share a few closing remarks with the President Denis Nouwer, who was also kindly physically is with us today, we thought that it would be good to have a few feedbacks also and comments from people who have been part of intersecting, people who have been part of the approaches that we have been developing through the T20. Who would like to start? Maybe Henri, with if you have a couple of remarks or issues which strike you with this infrastructure investments in intersecting?
Yes, thank you, Nicholas. Maybe the link, the very intimate link between it's working, it's not working? It's working. The intimate link between the environmental, climate change, biodiversity, as reminded 2 weeks ago in Marseille in the USCN World Conservation Congress Manifesto. First, the intimate relationship between nature, environment, and climate change and biodiversity. And on the other hand, the intimate link between these environmental priorities and the social issues. I think that's one of what we learned from the crisis, from the COVID crisis, is that people like this lady, and in our field, I'm working for Suez, we are providing environmental services in water, in waste, in air quality, in agriculture. And in the case of water, people realize that the society cannot work if people on the field or workers on the field are not here. They cannot work in home office as most of this in this assembly did, in more or less comfortable conditions. So I think it's very important that we have realized that all those issues are intimately linked, and that is more or less the guideline of the launching yesterday of the summit. And it happens to be our priority also and our economic interest. So that means that we have to find a new way to cooperate for the common goods, also integrating the private sector. It's also a tendency that was actually the COVID accelerated some tendencies that were already at stage before. And in the case of infrastructure, if I may, some words, Nicola, on the issue of infrastructure, I think it's realized that it's vital for our societies. So our colleague from Japan reminded that the infrastructure are more and more important in the last years. I think infrastructure have been important since antiquity. You know the case of Angkor in the 9th century, that probably collapsed because of water infrastructure, of the lack of syncing the development of the city with the infrastructure, in this case in the water infrastructure, and more or less since Neolithic, since people gathered together, the importance of logistic and infrastructure, and today it's more and more complex, and that's why it's very important to work together in like it has been, to have a goal like intersecting have. That we have to closely link the different actors of the cities, and not only of the cities, because one of the other consequences of the crisis is also the tendency that was stated before, which is urban exodus, which is so important. So we have to think also not only the cities, but the link, and the link between the cities, the hinterland of the city, and the rural area, which are of course more and more interconnected.
Thank you very much, Henri. And I think this dimension was consistently undervalued in the last decade when we were talking about urbanization, smart urbanization, etc. Completely overlooked, not just the periphery of the cities, but the linkages between urban and rural worlds, both in terms of development, but also in terms of carbon and decarbonization trajectories, in terms of food, in terms of land management, in many regards. And this is a very important note. Riyatu, we have also consistently worked with you, with your colleagues, with your institute, all through the past months. And we can see that we are across dimensions that require really cutting-edge knowledge in different fields, but also innovative approaches to scale and policy making. Maybe a few remarks from your standpoint in Indonesia, and as you wrote in Intersecting, do you think that these dimensions should also be on the table of the T20 of next year? And maybe you can say a few words about that. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicola. First, it has been an honor for me to join your initiative and in this journey of intersecting and joining this forum. And it is very exciting to read the book, and the illustrations range from solution of ideas and also real initiatives shown by various authors. From our perspective, for the case of Indonesia, that will be hosting G20 presidency in 2022 and T20, we are delighted as well, given the feedback from T20 Italy, as well as from this book of Intersecting. Surely, like prioritizing from previous keynote, quality of infrastructures, resilience, and inclusivity, it will be priority agenda in the T20 Indonesia as well. This is also for the case of many countries. I think moving forward for more of quality and also inclusive infrastructure is important. Maybe I can, for the case of Indonesia, the priority for resilience infrastructures and the need to also address environmental aspects is very, very needed. The case of Indonesia, based on study by UNESCO, for example, during 2014 and 2019, it is estimated that we have suffered an average of annual loss of more than 20 billion to natural disaster, and it is annually around 0.5 and 0.6 of GDP. So I think this is also as emphasized by Dean Sonobe. this is a clear benefit of incorporating perspective of resilience and quality infrastructures, involving as well various stakeholders, not only at the government, central government level. Most of the facilities, most of the infrastructure projects also being constructed and implementing at the cities level. Urban issues, given the current condition of COVID, also become not only local issues, but needs to be addressed through collaboration at the national as well as the local level. And I think T20 of Indonesia will also following up of previous engagement that already initiating by Italy and previous T20, as well as India that will host the next after Indonesia. Again, for the case of infrastructures, it is important to complement the physical infrastructures as well as improvement in non-physical aspect on social and institutional, because at the end, we believe quality and resilience infrastructures work well when it is aligned to the need of the people. So when the people itself already benefited economically, it will be easier as well for the communities to also build resilience among themselves, to be more prepared to deal with future risks exposed by climate change, natural disaster, for example. And in the context of developing country, advocating this issue need to also literacy advocating the issue involving non-government institution as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Riyatu. Raja Al-Mazoki here recently has issued an awarded paper on a different perspective, but I think very complementary, which is about state-dependent fiscal multipliers. But that's also very much connected to our discussion today about intersecting is how the economy, right, can produce value even in crisis times, and especially in changing times, which in the case of Saudi Arabia, a very resource-rich country, is as important when it comes to how to value natural and human capital. So thank you again, Raja, who is also a senior advisor to the Minister of Economy in Saudi Arabia and the former lead co-chair of the T20 Infrastructure Task Force last year, not only to join us, but to agree to say a few words on your understanding of the perspectives and development perspectives that we have been dealing with this morning. Raja, the floor is yours.
Thanks. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on this publication. It's really important for us to focus and also continue researching and discussing these issues. Our globe is well connected. Any failure in part of the connection and intersect in our globe will have a risk on us. And that's what we've seen after COVID-19. COVID-19 kind of a wake-up call for us how important the whole globe to work together, because such kind of a disease in part of the world spread to all of us. So that's meant we need also a strong connection, and infrastructure as part of this connections that need to be well done. In economics, we usually consider the infrastructure as a prerequisite to get a sustainable growth. If the infrastructure is not well developed and it's not well designed, that will have extra risk on the economy, bared by private sector investors, introduced and passed to consumers through prices and also the availability of services or goods. The problem which I think most of the world facing now is the waste on the money that is spent in infrastructure. Latest research from IMF mentioned more than a third of fund spent on infrastructure is wasted. So country could have decreased taxes or have this money for something else to do better than just wasting this money. And for developing country, things getting even worse. More than 50% spent in infrastructure is a wasted money. Such kind of an issue need actually to be focused and solved. And this is why PPP, public-private partnership, is playing maybe a good role to improve the transparency, improve the accountability, improve the efficiency. Of course, this will not work without a good governance system, without a good regulation, without also more involvement from international economics organizations to help the whole globe to really spend the right money, or at least reduce the waste. We'll not be able to release everything, but at least reduce the waste that's spent on infrastructures to have bigger positive impact on all of us in this globe. The other issue which strike me and bring to my attentions how important the money spent in R&D, and we've seen in COVID-19, R&D is the solution for us. We're facing several problems and issues. Without such money spent in R&D, and we have excellent centers and excellent researchers and spend money on them, then we'll not be able to solve the problem, and it will take us longer to get out of this problem. The average now R&D to GDP globally is around 2%, but I think we need to top it a little bit up, as it's been seen how this is really important to have more money injected on such kind of centers to help be ready in case facing any crisis or issues, that researcher will find the right solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raja. And this also links to something that has emerged very strongly from all the steps of intersecting, is that we do need existing research and knowledge institutions and think tanks, but also there is, as 50 years ago, right, in the times of the Club of Rome report, of the Meadows report and so on, new generation of advanced institutes or institutes for advanced studies who are in the capacity to build those bridges, right, and to make a difference. I know, Henri, you had the last comment also on infrastructure modernization, and then we will hear the final remarks from President Snower.
Yes, I would like to make a proposal, an offer to my colleagues present here at the table, and it's also linked, dear Raja, to the R&D issue, which is infrastructure and especially the vital infrastructure, what in English you call critical infrastructure, which is gas, electricity, energy, transport, of course, we have to add transport, water, telecommunication, of course, today. This critical infrastructure, I think we have to add also what we call in French opérateurs d'importance vitale, operators of vital importance, which includes not only the link, but also the organization and the people working and operating this infrastructure. I think it's very important, and it will be kind of technical and anticipation work, maybe for Professor Croce, you are specialized, if I understand well, or Dean Snower, or our friend Sachin Chaturvedi in India, to precisely quantify the cost needed for modernization of this infrastructure, to be prepared also the cost of unpreparedness to crisis, pandemic, natural extreme crisis, terrorist crisis. Unfortunately, all these kind of issues will increase in the next decades. So to quantify the cost of the modernization, of the anticipation of unpreparedness, and maybe anticipate also new function in organization to operate this kind of issues. We could maybe start with the countries that are represented here in our panel.
Thank you very much, Henri. This is how we have moved on in the past months, and we can see I would say the good news is that we can see avenues for continuous improvement and progress. Riyatu, thank you very much. I appreciate that you also were able to take the time and the trouble. Maybe Dean Sonobe or Riyatu, a final word of comment before we pass it on to Denis Nower.
Please, Riyad. Please, Dean Sonobe first. Hello.
Dean Sonobe?
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
On Dean Sonobe, we hear you.
Yeah, I just said I wish I could join you there physically.
But in a way you are. So, and there will be for sure other opportunities linked with intersecting and others to actually meet. But we also miss you here. Riyatu.
Yeah, I think the case of modernizing infrastructures on more technical building the knowledge gap. One more important thing also, maybe there is something that might be a need to tailor in each specific countries. There might be not one size fits all approach. So it is better also to, it is better to identifying first the problems and then advocating what is workable on standard and quality of resilience infrastructure. For example, for sure, the infrastructures in Indonesia, in terms of the institution, may be far from Japan, but there can be sectors sharing knowledge on the case that might be good enough, accountable enough that also can bring out a minimum of inclusive resilience and quality of infrastructures.
Thank you very much. We can applaud our speakers. Thank you very much. And I will now invite President Denis Nower from the Global Solutions Initiative to join me on stage. If we can put the small name tag and along with Eduardo. Denis, thank you very much. I'm honored that you could join us here and also for this work with the Global Solutions. The floor is yours for a final round of remarks, comments, observations.
The honor is mine. I think this is an extremely important initiative, and I'd like to use these closing remarks to bring this initiative into the wider G20 context. The G20, as we know, is not a world government. It can't tell people what to do. What it can do is it can mobilize expertise. It can motivate policymakers, politicians to move in the right direction. And if it's very successful, and it rarely is, but when it is very successful, it also manages to address civil societies, the hearts and minds of people. And this aspect of not only addressing the heads, but also the heart, is, I believe, at the center of this intersecting initiative. If you just look at the book, it contains lots of interesting proposals, analyses, but it contains pictures that are beautiful and that are motivating. And that, I believe, is another aspect of intersecting that we should take very seriously. In fact, the intersection of different worldviews that meet within the G20 and that basically provide the values and the motivations out of which people ultimately, on the policy-making front, on a macro supranational level, right down to the local level, are driving people. And I'd like to point out 4 really very short worldviews that drive the urbanization process and the communication between the urban landscapes and the rural landscapes around them. The first, which is most strongly represented in this forum, is the economist's approach. And there it's very simple. Quantify everything, quantify all the benefits, quantify all the costs, subtract the costs from the benefits, and then maximize that difference. It's very simple. You don't really need politics. You don't need anything else. It's a nice self-enclosed problem. And that means that we need to price as much as possible. Once everything is priced, then the whole thing amounts to the simple calculations and good management. That is one approach that needs to be taken seriously here, and it is a worldview that is basically a materialistic utilitarian worldview. Second worldview is the classical liberal worldview. We gain our dignity as human beings from constructing the landscapes in which we live, constructing our niches, whether it is in agriculture or in industry or in urban landscapes or infrastructure. It is that construction of our niches that empowers us and gives us meaning in life. And therefore, we need to build these urban spaces in a way that people feel empowered. This is not the same thing as benefits minus costs. It appeals to a very basic human need and purpose. That's the second worldview that focuses on empowerment and agency. The third worldview is what could be called the romantic worldview, which is the landscapes that we create are the landscapes whereby we relate to other people and we relate to the social groups that give us our social identity. And that can't be priced either, so that costs minus benefits minus costs doesn't fit in, and it's not the same as personal empowerment because it sees the world in terms of relationships. So urban landscapes, what type of relationships do they enable? They formulate the networks whereby we communicate and interact with one another. And seeing the world through that perspective is terribly important as well. And the fourth and last worldview that I'd like to share with you is the ecological worldview. That is, whatever it is that we create, we live within ecological systems that are all highly interrelated with one another. And our job is to make sure that whatever we do, we don't destabilize the great systems within which we are embedded. And we do not understand these systems perfectly by any means. In fact, we are very far from understanding them. The pandemic, also the financial crisis that you related about, and many other aspects of G20 work show that we live in a world of radical uncertainty. And this uncertainty is something that we need to engage with. And so this combination of embeddedness within natural and artificial systems and the uncertainties that we face when we try to manage these systems is the ecological view. Be aware of the ecology within which you operate. These four worldviews all find their place within intersecting, and if we are going to build a future that is worthy of the next generation, we must be aware that these four worldviews, as well as others, are all valid aspects of our existence and all give different meaning in life. And our prosperity depends on our ability to draw on all these different worldviews. And consequently, this entire architecture of this book, the pictures that motivate, the ideas that help focus our cognitive capacities, are all a good basis for the next steps. And as President of Global Solutions, as well as advisor in various T20 contexts, I am highly honored to be associated with this intersecting initiative and very much look forward to the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And I understand also we have work to do now, right? Eduardo, the final word from the host.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Nicolas and to all the speakers for this fantastic opportunity in occasion of intersecting and the T20 in Milan. Just a few final words. I really think that intersecting comes at the right moment, thanks to all the stakeholders who contributed to it. Intersecting really provides a global approach and a global view of international problems and opportunities. This is fully coherent, for example, with the Agenda 2030, the Paris Agreement, and the G20 approach, where there is no distinction between developing and developed countries in terms of approach, but there is an homogeneous approach, trying to consider the planet as a whole with differentiated problems, but with overall framework to deal with it. And I think intersecting is fully aware of this. The second and final consideration, also coming from the last speech, is the role of education. Bocconi does research, but does education, and also other speakers are involved in this, of course, in these topics. And of course, education has also to change. And I think that in a university like Bocconi, mainly focused on economics and policy, now there is a full consciousness that only an utilitarian approach would not be sufficient, and the attempt to integrate an approach where material infrastructures, natural capital, social capital, human capital are all full considered in our choices, public and private choices, is something that it is happening, where all these aspects are kept into account, and where the mindset of future policymakers and future businessmen can contribute to keep together all these points. This is the first official presentation before a pre-presentation, but as Nicolas said, there will be more occasions to speak about intersecting, and also there will be new initiatives where other aspects which are already taken into account in intersecting could be more deeply analyzed. I think this is also an opportunity, and I'm glad that Bocconi is the place where we are also talking about these future approaches. So thank you, everybody, and I leave to Nicolas the very last farewell.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. And it was important that we launched Intersecting in the context of an education institution, because I see the upcoming generations, right, also here in the room, and that's also something that we have to care about very much. And we have also started, together with our colleagues in Indonesia, with the group of the youth of the G20, right, to seek to connect, I would say, these sometimes high-flying approaches with expectations and needs from young generations. I was in Rome 1.5 weeks ago for a high-level conference of the G20 organized by the Long-Term Investors Club of the G20 about infrastructure. And when I arrived by train, not by plane, by train in Roma Termini, I could not just go through because there was a demonstrations, Friday for Future. There was one in Milano recently, the week before it was in Rome. And the people were very serious and joyful and conscious, young people and families and so on. And I had to wait that they go through. I made a couple of photos, we discussed a little bit, then I was of course late. But I thought that these were the two different sides of exactly the same coin. If these kind of vehicles like Intersecting helps circulate, right, across these different dimensions, that's one thing. But we need now to really consolidate these framework and intuitions. And thank you very much, Eduardo, for hosting the meetings, and Dennis Noah for referring to those 4 worldviews that we definitely should consider working upon. Thank you very much to the speakers online and here, and to the audience and to Bocconi. We now wrap up the meeting. We make, if you agree, a small photo together with you and with the book as a reminder. And then I invite you to continue following up the last day of the T20 summit with you, right, among the speakers this afternoon. Thank you very much. A bientôt. Arrivederci. Grazie mille.